When the first wave of the intergalactic envoy landed on Earth, the aliens couldn't help but snicker. The gathering had been planned as a sort of cross-species cultural exchange, but the alien women, each a breathtaking specimen of beauty and intelligence, found the entire thing amusing. Earth, they agreed, was a quaint little joke of a planet. Its inhabitants, particularly the men, were crude, overly sexualized, and, most importantly, hopelessly inadequate compared to their own advanced cultures. Zara, the leader of the group, stood confidently in front of the human representatives, radiating the typical arrogance that made alien species like hers so insufferable to other races. With her glowing teal skin and 4 arms, she casually examined her manicured nails, waiting for the humans to say something, anything, that could change her mind. When no one spoke up, she couldn't help herself and let out a small, almost mocking laugh. "This is your greatest species?" she purred. "Primitive, ugly, and unsophisticated." Her companions, all equally stunning but with their own unique features, antennae, glowing eyes, and impossibly smooth complexions, chimed in with their laughter. "They have nothing compared to our technology, Zara," one of them teased, nudging her with an elegant, multi-fingered hand. Zara wasn't wrong. Earthlings were downright embarrassing. Their understanding of intergalactic matters barely scratched the surface, and their sexually charged behavior? Pitiful at best. She couldn't help but find the thought of Earth's men hilarious. "They haven't even figured out the basics of proper mating rituals," she mused aloud, voice dripping with disdain. But Earth had a secret weapon, a man named Jim. Jim wasn't particularly attractive by any standards. In fact, he was the kind of guy who blended into a crowd. He wasn't tall, muscular, or particularly smooth with the ladies. But there was one thing Jim had in abundance: confidence. And it wasn't the quiet, self-assured kind. No, Jim was the type of guy who could wander into a room full of supermodels and start telling them about his high school football career without missing a beat. So when Zara, amused by the challenge, tossed out an idea, an experiment, in which human men would compete to see who could bed the most alien women, it was Jim who stepped forward. "Sure," he said, without missing a beat. "I'll take you all on. I bet I can outlast any of you." His words were reckless, bold, and most importantly, they were completely oblivious to the absurdity of the situation. He hadn't even considered that these alien women, while absurdly attractive, were also physically and biologically superior to humans in every way. But Jim was undeterred. The alien women, incredulous at first, burst into laughter at the audacity of it all. The idea that a human man, especially one as average as Jim, would even attempt to compete with them was both ludicrous and entertaining. Zara raised an eyebrow. "You think you can keep up with us? You do realize we are superior in every way, right?" She emphasized the word superior, as if Jim's lack of understanding was the punchline of some joke they were all in on. Jim grinned. "I'm not here to win. I'm here to prove that Earth's got something you aliens don't, the human spirit. We're resilient." The alien women were intrigued now, more so by Jim's unshakable confidence than his actual words. Zara gestured toward the other women. "Let's see then. You think you can handle us? We'll make it interesting. Each of us will spend a night with you. If you can handle us, we'll admit we were wrong and give you the greatest prize you could imagine." Jim, however, had no idea what he was walking into. The concept of handling an alien was an alien concept to him, in every sense of the word. He had no clue what he was up against, no clue about the advanced biology of these alien species, or the vast differences in reproductive capabilities between humans and aliens. He was operating on pure bravado and a general, albeit inaccurate, belief that he was a master of the bedroom. The first alien, Zara, was nothing like Jim had imagined. Her beauty was stunning, but it was the way she moved, the way she carried herself that knocked him off guard. She wasn't just attractive. She was a force of nature. Jim, despite his overconfidence, found himself unsure how to proceed. He had expected a simple one-night stand, maybe a few laughs. But this felt different. Zara, sensing Jim's hesitation, smirked. "This is where it gets interesting, human. Let's see if your earthly charm can live up to its reputation." And so, the night unfolded. Jim had no real plan, no strategy. He didn't even know how to approach Zara, let alone the others. Yet, somehow, perhaps it was his strange brand of cluelessness, perhaps it was his unwarranted self-confidence, he managed to somehow get through the night. Zara left him in the early hours, still glowing with smug satisfaction, but Jim? He was gritting like an idiot. The next day, to everyone's shock, including Jim's, the alien women started to feel something they hadn't anticipated. Zara, usually aloof and dismissive, found herself thinking about the night in ways that were a little more personal than she had intended. It wasn't just that Jim had handled her, he'd made her feel something. For the first time in centuries, an alien woman was questioning her superiority. And that was just the beginning. As the day wore on, the other alien women began to fall into the same pattern. They'd mocked Jim at first, but as the night stretched on, something inside them changed. It wasn't that they were physically attracted to him, though, in their own strange way, they were. It was more about the idea that this human man had somehow bypassed all their defenses. Despite their biology, their culture, and their intelligence, Jim had cracked them open with nothing more than his audacity. And so, the intergalactic competition became something entirely unexpected, a game of emotional and physical discovery that none of them were prepared for. Each of the alien women, after spending a night with Jim, started to reconsider their views on Earth, on humans, and on the limits of their own species' superiority. This was no longer just a playful contest. It was a situation that could change the course of their understanding of themselves and the humans they had once dismissed. The more they tried to dismiss Jim, the more they realized how entangled they had become with him, and in ways they couldn't have anticipated. Jim had no idea what he was walking into when he showed up at the conference. The invitation, as ridiculous as it seemed, had been too interesting to pass up. Intergalactic sex competition, it had said, followed by some vague explanation about a group of visiting females from different planets. Jim, ever the optimist, and a self-proclaimed expert in matters of attraction, assumed it was some sort of joke. Still, the idea of participating in something so bizarre appealed to him. Who wouldn't want to impress a bunch of exotic alien women? He was wrong, of course. What he had walked into was no joke. The alien women, who had all gathered in a sleek, shimmering conference hall, were more than prepared to show Earth exactly how primitive its inhabitants were in the sexual department. Zara, leading the group with all the poise of a queen, eyed Jim as he strolled in, oblivious to the condescending gazes. Zara's sharp gaze never left him. She sized him up the way a cat examines an unsuspecting mouse. "This is the Earth specimen?" she whispered to her companions, who giggled at the sight of Jim, a middle-aged man with a bit of a beer belly, wearing a t-shirt that said, "I'm not drunk, I'm just speaking fluent, idiot." Jim, of course, had no idea they were laughing at him. He approached the women with that same unwavering confidence, wearing an idiotic grin that only grew wider when he realized just how stunning the aliens were up close. His gaze wandered, fixing on Zara first, then her companions. They were, in a word, breathtaking. "Hello, ladies," Jim said, giving a lopsided grin. "You sure know how to make a guy feel underdressed." The aliens exchanged looks, a mix of amusement and disbelief. Zara crossed her arms, raising a skeptical eyebrow. "You do realize this is a competition, right?" To prove who can best satisfy us? She asked, her voice dripping with condescension. Jim, completely unfazed, puffed out his chest and gave her a wink. Competition? Oh, honey, I don't compete. I just win. Now, where do I sign up? At this point, Zara's companions, her less confident but equally curious colleagues, started exchanging looks, unsure whether Jim was serious or just an embarrassment to the entire human race. Zara, however, was intrigued. She had thought of Earth's men as bumbling idiots, easy to manipulate. But there was something about Jim's cocky demeanor that began to wear on her. He was crude, yes, but he was confident. And confidence, Zara knew, was something to be reckoned with. The challenge was simple. Jim was to spend the night with as many alien women as possible, each of them representing a different species. Each alien had her own method of proving their sexual prowess, some requiring intricate techniques, others asking for physical endurance, but all ultimately about how well the human could satisfy them. Zara, confident in her superiority, assumed it would be a laugh. Humans, she believed, were far too simplistic in their desires to ever satisfy her species' complex sexual needs. As the night progressed, the alien women began to realize something. Jim wasn't actually terrible. He was shockingly competent, despite being clueless about the nuances of alien sex, or really anything to do with it. He was rough, unrefined, and awkward, but there was an honesty to it, a rawness that none of them had expected. The sex was, by their standards, an utter mess. But somehow, Jim kept them coming back. Zara, who had spent the evening watching from the sidelines with growing frustration, found herself drawn to Jim's unwavering confidence. It wasn't about skill or finesse. It was about something far more primal, something that, at first, had seemed completely beneath her and her species' standards. Jim wasn't trying to impress them. He was just being himself, and that, it seemed, was something the alien women had failed to consider. It was a strange feeling for Zara. Embarrassment, intrigue, and most shockingly, a deep, growing desire. By the time the night drew to a close, the alien women were all utterly spent, not just physically but emotionally as well. They had been expecting a performance, something polished and perfect. Instead, Jim had given them something unexpected, raw, messy, and undeniably real. Zara found herself in an unusual position. She was both irritated by Jim's success and, inexplicably, attracted to him in ways she hadn't thought possible. Later that night, as the alien women regrouped, Zara couldn't help but laugh, though the sound was more bitter than anything else. I didn't expect this. Her companions, once skeptical of Jim, now looked at him in a new light. He had done what no other human, let alone alien, could. Jim, meanwhile, couldn't have cared less. He was too busy basking in his victory. So, where do I get my prize? He asked, flashing a cheeky grin. He wasn't sure what was going on, but one thing was for certain. Jim had a new confidence. And when one of the aliens gestured toward him with a knowing smirk, he shrugged and muttered, "This is gonna be one hell of a story." What Jim didn't realize, though, was that the story wasn't over. It was only just beginning. And as the alien women pondered their next steps, both in their own species' intergalactic standings and in their increasingly complicated feelings toward Jim, they would soon find out that the Earth they had so thoroughly ridiculed might not have been the joke after all. Jim's confidence only grew as the challenge was explained to him. In fact, it grew a little too much. So let me get this straight, he said, gritting like an idiot. You alien women want me to, what? Prove I can keep up with you? I mean, if you're looking for a human who knows how to, make an impression, well, you came to the right place. He winked, and, as though on cue, Zara raised an eyebrow, her lips curling into an amused smirk. Zara knew this was going to be easy, too easy. The humans' apparent lack of sexual sophistication was, after all, one of the reasons the competition had been organized in the first place. They had been expecting a parade of eager, awkward men, desperate to prove themselves to women they could never hope to match. But Jim was different. Jim wasn't desperate. Jim was just, well, Jim, completely unaware of what he had gotten himself into. The first few rounds of the competition were exactly as Zara had anticipated. Earth's men, like a herd of confused sheep, attempted to impress the aliens in every possible way. Some tried using crude gestures, others tried to rely on charm they didn't actually possess. But no one was really close to succeeding. The aliens barely stifled their laughter as each man tried to one-up the other with exaggerated pickup lines and misguided attempts at humor. It was a spectacular failure. Then Jim took his turn. Without hesitation, Jim walked up to Zara, who was sitting slightly apart from the others, and whispered something in her ear. She leaned in, intrigued, but Jim's words were muffled to the other aliens. For a moment, everything went quiet. Zara's face was unreadable. The room buzzed with anticipation. The others exchanged puzzled looks, wondering what Jim could have possibly said to make Zara stop laughing. "Well then," Zara said, her voice dropping an octave, "I guess I underestimated you." She didn't realize it yet, but that was the beginning of the end for her and her friends. Jim's natural charm, or whatever you wanted to call it, wasn't anything that could be taught in alien textbooks. It wasn't about flashy words or elaborate rituals. Jim wasn't concerned with winning their challenge. He was just having fun, and for the first time that evening, Zara felt herself drawn to something she hadn't expected: simplicity. It didn't take long for the others to join in, much to their horror. One by one, they found themselves increasingly intrigued by Jim's technique. The aliens, who had once prided themselves on their superior knowledge of mating rituals, found themselves swept up in a maelstrom of human unpredictability. Jim didn't bother with anything subtle. He didn't need to. In a room full of women who had spent millennia perfecting their craft, Jim became an unpredictable storm, and it was exactly what they weren't prepared for. Zara found herself pulled into his orbit. It wasn't just the charm that had her intrigued anymore. It was something else, something deeper. She could see it in his eyes, the raw, uncalculated energy he gave off. It wasn't about trying to impress them or playing their game. It was about letting them come to him. And much to her own shock, she did. Soon enough, it wasn't just Zara who was caught up in the whirlwind of human charisma. One by one, her companions found themselves giving in to the same temptation, each alien woman falling victim to Jim's unpredictability. They couldn't explain why it was happening. It didn't make sense. None of them had ever encountered anything like it before. In all their intergalactic travels, they had never been rendered speechless by a mere human. Jim wasn't just winning the competition, he was breaking their very perceptions of what it meant to be alien. With each passing hour, the lines between what was expected and what was real blurred. And as it did, so did Zara's resolve. She was beginning to think that maybe, just maybe, the joke wasn't on Earth at all. By the end of the night, Jim had done the impossible. Not only had he won the competition, but he had done so in such an unexpected way that the alien women didn't know how to react. In fact, they couldn't even remember exactly how it had happened. The whole event had become a whirlwind of laughter, confusion, and more than anything, an overwhelming realization that they had vastly underestimated the humans they had so easily dismissed. But it wasn't over yet. What none of them had accounted for, what Zara had definitely not accounted for, was the fact that Jim wasn't the only one winning. Something deeper had shifted in the atmosphere. The competition was supposed to be a simple sexual conquest, but now, with Zara's growing curiosity and undeniable attraction, things were starting to change. It was only the beginning. The aftermath of Jim's success was nothing short of chaotic. What had started as a joke, a competition where Earth's men were supposed to embarrass themselves in front of a group of superior alien women, suddenly took an unexpected turn. Jim, with his unpolished swagger and raw, unrefined charm, had managed to do the impossible. He'd actually turned the tables. Zara, the self-assured leader of the alien women, found herself in a position she had never imagined. The initial surprise in her expression quickly shifted to something else, something more complicated. She felt a strange pull toward Jim that she couldn't explain, but there it was. And it wasn't just her. One by one, each of the other alien women, each more advanced than the last, found themselves inexplicably drawn to him. The thing was, they had never expected it. Their entire species had been bred for perfection, their reproduction methods a scientific marvel, and yet here they were, all inexplicably pregnant by this bumbling, unremarkable human. At first, they laughed it off. It was impossible. A fluke. Surely Jim couldn't be capable of something like this. But as the weeks passed, and the signs became undeniable, the alien women realized they had been completely wrong. They had mocked humanity for its lack of sexual sophistication, its crude, primitive ways. And yet, in the most unexpected of circumstances, a human man had not only matched their expectations, but far exceeded them in ways they hadn't thought possible. Each of the women began to experience the same strange symptoms: morning sickness, cravings, and, of course, an ever-growing belly. The reality of their situation began to sink in, and the once mighty Zara, who had prided herself on her flawless control, found herself constantly distracted by her rapidly changing body. She could no longer deny that something had happened, something more than just a physical act. There was a connection now, an emotional bond that she had never thought possible with a human. But the real fun came when the other alien women started to notice. Zara, normally the most composed and intelligent of them all, was now frantically trying to hide her growing belly. She no longer strutted with the same grace. She waddled slightly, her elegant stride replaced by a more awkward gait. And when she ran into her fellow aliens, each now also showing signs of their unexpected pregnancies, they exchanged knowing glances. They had been caught in the same trap, and they were all secretly thrilled. At first, it was embarrassing. The once proud alien women were now stuck in a situation they had never anticipated. But as the days passed, their initial panic faded, replaced by something else. Zara, in particular, found herself unable to stay away from Jim. The more she saw him, the more she realized just how ridiculous her species had been in their assessment of humanity. She hadn't just been wrong about the human race. She had been wrong about herself, too. For years, she had prided herself on her independence, her ability to control everything around her. But now, she was beginning to question it all. Was she truly better than him? Was her race truly superior? Or had humanity, especially Jim, taught her a lesson she'd never forget? The dynamic between the alien women and Jim shifted. What had started as a competition, a battle of wills, was now something else entirely. Jim, whose self-assurance had made him seem like a clueless fool to the aliens, became something more, something irreplaceable. What had begun as an absurd, almost comical set of circumstances now felt like a strange, twisted love story. Zara found herself thinking about him more often than she cared to admit. She had, in the past, laughed at Earth's sexual prowess, but now she saw the truth. Jim had something that no amount of advanced technology, genetic modification, or reproductive science could replicate: the human touch. And while Jim continued to be oblivious to the chaos he had caused, the alien women were slowly realizing the full depth of the situation. They had underestimated humanity, and in doing so, they had inadvertently created a bond that was more than physical. It was emotional. It was real. Their once infallible confidence began to crack. They began to see their own arrogance for what it was, childish and naive. As they struggled with their own growing feelings for Jim, they also came to terms with the fact that they were no longer in control. They had given in to their basest instincts, and in doing so, they had changed the course of their own futures. The plot that had started as a joke had turned into something far more complicated. Jim, the unassuming human man, had inadvertently become the center of an intergalactic love story, a story no one had expected, least of all the alien women who had once laughed at Earth's inhabitants. Now, they were left to figure out what came next. As the days passed, and their pregnancies became more obvious, the alien women began to confide in one another. There was no shame in their situation. In fact, they found comfort in their shared experiences. They had been forced to confront their own prejudices and, in doing so, had learned something about themselves they hadn't expected. For Zara, the revelation was the hardest to accept. She had once believed that her species, her beauty, and her intellect made her superior to all others. But now, with a growing belly and a heart full of confusion, she realized she had been wrong. Jim wasn't just a means to an end. He was something more, someone she might actually care about. The story of Jim and the alien women wasn't just about sex. It was about the humbling power of connection and the absurdity of making assumptions about other beings without understanding them. As the women sat together, each with their own unique experiences of humanity's unexpected effect on them, they couldn't help but laugh, not out of mockery, but out of a sense of shared wonder. They had been proven wrong in the most comical, absurd, and ultimately heartwarming way possible. And they couldn't help but be grateful for the lesson Earth had taught them.